Today on Call for Two, a quick spoiler-free review of Lost in Adventure: The Labyrinth. Is this game right for you or your kids? Let's find out. Let's start with some facts. This is a sort of choose-your-own-adventure exploration game. Cost me about $15 in February 2025. You'll get about 2 hours of gameplay out of it if you play through it only once. I think experienced players probably will only play through it once. Maybe young kids could play through it a couple of times. It is rated starting at younger age kids, ages 10 and up. Nothing gets destroyed, so you could pass it along, sell it, trade it after you finish. You can watch our longer 5-hour playthrough with a spoiler-filled discussion at the end of it. Now, I've said this is going to be a spoiler-free review, but I do want to show you the components and walk through the rules a little bit with you so you can see how this works and how it's different from other sort of small box choose-your-own-adventure exploration games. So a key way that it's different is that there's a big map that gets built. So let's look at the cards. You've got these tokens that don't really mean anything. They're sort of used to keep track of your sort of score. Then you've got 4 decks of cards here. Let's get these out and let's walk through the rules so I can explain to you the basic way it works. This deck here, these are map cards. They're all beautifully illustrated, oversized images that get assembled together to build a map. This is the first one you'll see. Unlike many choose-your-own-adventure type games, there aren't things to interact with. There aren't numbers on specific locations that you say, oh, that's this number, let me interact with that. I'll show you how it works. You can see on the back of the box, though, that as you explore, these map cards come out and connect. Often they'll be face down. You'll have to go to a place and turn it over to explore it. The other thing you're doing much of your time as you're moving around on these maps is collecting objects and interacting with them. So this deck here, this large deck, lettered and letters and numbers, are items. These are all items you can find. Once you find it, you'll keep it until you use it, interact with it, and then you'll lose it, just to give you some brief idea of what they look like and what text. Now, if I look at the rules, you'll see that the object cards here, the item cards, have little letters on them, and the way you use these item cards is with this deck, this very large deck of interaction cards. And the way these work is whenever you explore a map location, it'll have a number up here, 1, and there's one little pip. That means one of the interaction cards that matches this number comes out. And you'll see the iconography is very clear. The card has 1 pip. That tells you that there's, the number 1, here's the 1 pip. And some of these cards will have 3 pips, which means you go to a certain card and 3 cards come out that you can interact with. So every map card that you explore will have some items you can interact with it, and they'll be in the form of these cards. They're all double-sided. It's got some little text. Some of the interaction cards just look like this, which means the only thing you can do with this card is to flip it over to interact with it. This is the very first decision you'll make with the game. So let's choose it. This is what you'll be faced with in the beginning. Let's just take a look at this one choice. In this case, it just sets you up and tells you what to do. It tells you to bring up this card and cover up this card. Cover up this card, and then you can flip it over and explore it. There's some rules for when you have to move your character. At other times, you'll get out an interaction card, which will have a little triangle on it. And that will tell you that to interact with that card, you have to use another item. And you'll choose what item you think is best to use with that card. Then you'll flip them both over and you'll see whether a couple things can happen. If there's a specific entry on the interaction card for that item, then you'll read that entry. So sometimes there'll be multiple items you can interact with a thing on the map with, and might have a bad outcome, might have a good outcome. It might tell you to draw new cards. If there's no interaction, then you just flip it over and try again with something else. The last kind of card that is used in the game are these prophecy cards, these purple cards. I don't want to show you these because they give away information, but there's 10 of them, and they're like little missions, little goals that you're expected to achieve. If you want to get the best score through a playthrough, you'll have to achieve almost all of these. Each of them has like a one-line sentence, like your goal is to rescue this person, etc. And then it might have a little bit of a reward for doing so in the form of refreshing certain tokens here. Occasionally these tokens are checked, but I think for the most part, you're just trying to get the best score. So as you play, you'll explore this world, this map. You'll discover objects. You'll interact with things. Sometimes you'll have a bad outcome. Sometimes you'll have a good outcome. You'll have to be a little clever about how you do it. You will get to the end of a story, and then you'll get scored based on how many prophecies you were able to achieve. Let's talk about the positives here. This really is a fun little adventure game. It does capture very much the feel of a point and click adventure game in two ways that are sort of different from some other similar games, and especially in such a small box. The first thing that's notable here is the large map that you build and explore. It's big. It's a large map of cards that get assembled. It almost reminds me a little bit of the Seventh Continent or Seventh Citadel in the sense of assembling and exploring this map. And by the time you get to the end of the game, you've made a nice, big, fun, connected panorama of locations. And it really does give you the sense of being in this large place that you've explored. It is fun to explore. The art, the oversized cards with the full color art is beautiful. It's very well done. There's illustrations of every object in the deck, and there's a big deck of objects and tons of ways to interact with things, some just for the fun and humor of it, some mistakes you can make. It's not all, sometimes you do have to think a little bit carefully about what object to interact with what, because you could lose it. There's different ways to solve different little puzzles of how you get past something. It's always figuring out what object to use with what. Occasionally you have to use two objects in combination. Occasionally you have to sort of evolve or craft an object. Nothing super deep here, but it's all fun. It's all enjoyable. The process of using objects, opening doors, unlocking things, discovering little treasures. And the prophecy cards, which give you different little goals, that's all helps motivate you to have fun in this world. You're like, oh, this is something now that I can do. You frequently have several of them, and you're like, well, should we try to do this? Should we try to do this? And there is a real sense of humor here. It's got its own personality. It might not be for everyone, but it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But what's really interesting for me, the highlight of this game, which is this sort of light, choose your own adventure, point and click adventure story with some humor, sort of surprising thing here is how much of a deep cut into Greek mythology is here, especially for a game that feels like it's aimed at kids. there are real callbacks to real Greek mythology stories, several of them here, including some little esoteric details. And that's lots of stuff that is going to go over your head, even if you're familiar with the main thrust of some of these Greek mythology tales. You'll look it up and you'll go on the internet and you'll be like, are these names, are these people and places real in Greek mythology? And they almost all are. It's really quite satisfying. And the last positive I'll note here is that it at least creates the illusion while you're playing of danger. It does feel like you can make mistakes and there'll be ramifications, and you will get a worse score if you make some of these mistakes. But you can make mistakes that you sort of can't come back from, or you'll at least lose this little piece of the puzzle, this little piece of the ending. So you find yourself locked out of certain goals because of bad choices you made, an item you used and lost because you used it in an imperfect way. Because of that, it means you might get a tiny bit of replayability here, maybe especially if you're a young kid. I do think, though, it is pushing it to talk about replaying this because it will take you a couple hours and you're not going to want to redo most of the stuff here. So let's talk about some cons. One of the cons that I want to call your attention to is this little catchphrase on the box. It says, explore an unknown world, unlock its secrets one card at a time, use objects wisely, talk to people, find clues, but don't forget your adventurer's instincts. All great. Then it says the ending is up to you. That's really a bit of a lie. There really aren't multiple endings here. In fact, I'd go so far to say that of the kind of choose your own adventure card games, and some are quite small, just a deck of cards, this may have the least amount of you choosing your ending or choosing a different branching path. That's really a lie. That is not happening here, except in the most trivial, inconsequential way. So there isn't really a branching story here. There is one story, one path. It's just that if you don't play it perfectly, there may be a couple little goals that you might miss on one pathway through. Not going to make too much of a difference. There are occasionally different ways to solve it, but they don't really affect the story. You may just want to play through it once and then peek at the end at different possibilities. Another criticism might be occasionally it feels like you're combining objects in an arbitrary way that aren't necessarily solved via deduction, but sort of solved like, okay, I don't know what else to do. This is all we have. We're stuck here. Let's just randomly try combining objects. The nature of it all being card-based, and it is wonderful that it's all card-based, no use of the internet, all the object interactions are all resolved with cards. You don't have to look up anything in a book. It helps everything move very smoothly. But one of the consequences is when you try to interact with two cards, you can see, oh, I used the object I tried to use is not listed here, but you sort of can't help but see, oh, it wanted card B. Then you flip it back over and you look around. Oh, there's item B. Let me try this. So information leaks as you play it, as you try things, but only when you make a mistake. As long as you take your time here, you're not going to get too much of that. And then lastly, the last negative here is simply that it is on the easy side. There's not deep, hard deduction going on here. There are no puzzles per se to work out. Now, is that a negative for you? I think if you are an experienced mystery gamer and you're going to play just adults here, that is going to take away from this. It's still kind of fun experience, but it's not as satisfying as it might be if you're playing with a younger child. Which brings me to my bottom line here. I think for experienced gamers looking for a challenge, that's not quite this, but it could give you some nostalgia if you know the Greek mythology or if you want to play a sort of choose your own adventure game. I think the sweet spot here, though, is a kid and an adult. I do think you could have a great time here. There are some fun, dangerous moments. There's lots of fun creatures. And then there's the whole lore of the Greek mythology and the feeling of being in this strange place with its own rules. And sort of being able to tell this is from some real stories, some really old stories. And I think an adult and a kid could get different kinds of enjoyment while playing this together. I would love to hear if you disagree with me, you agree with me, if you play this game with your kids, what they thought of it. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next video.